Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff Mom Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. So for this Monday mini, we're going to revisit our very first episode that Samantha and I did together in the way back.
Pre-pandemic, which feels like decades ago.
Yes, it does. It feels like a very long time ago. And the topic, which is always fun to tell our bosses when they're like, do you remember the very first episode the two of you did together was, are we failures? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's in that episode, if you haven't heard it or don't quite remember, we just kind of talked about how, in what ways we felt like failures, because spoiler alert, there were a lot of like, I do feel like I failed in this way or this way or this way, and why we felt that way. And I was thinking about this, because we've been meaning to revisit this one for a while. And I was thinking about what I said I felt like a failure, in what ways in that one. And it's interesting because while I guess this one's going to have kind of a silver lining for me, because there's some things are still the same. Some things I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Because we were talking individually, but also when it comes to feminism. But some things I'm like, I don't feel so much as a failure around that one anymore. Like, especially we talked about like being single or like not having a house or not owning anything. Like, so because I've like had my sort of coming out journey on this podcast, like, I don't know. It was interesting. I thought, I kind of honestly, listeners, thought it was going to be a bit of a downer of a revisit. And some of it is, but some of it is hopeful. And that feels nice. And the pandemic has certainly changed the calculation in a lot of ways. But I don't know. What were your thoughts or feelings about revisiting this topic?
Right. I mean, definitely when it comes to physical checks, as in like, yes, I've done this and I've done this. And let me show you this physical evidence. I feel like maybe I've grown in that. But like you said, I also think back at what we saw during the pandemic and people really calling out problematic ideas of what success is, especially when it comes to women. And I love seeing this turnaround. I love seeing this conversation taking a new step forward. To me, it's a step forward. Maybe it's because it aligns with me more. I don't know. But it's kind of nice to see to that route. Of course, for me, because I am somewhat of a pessimist in just my personality type, there are other things that I'm very worried about. But in comparison to what's happening around us, it feels like we're taking a step forward. Personally, I feel like I've taken a step forward personally. Then I say that and I feel immediate guilt for saying that because I feel like I shouldn't say that because it feels gloaty.
Yes. And that is another conversation we saw play out during the pandemic as well. And it's not a new conversation by any means, but I think it became more of a like, I'm using the pandemic for glow up thing.
Right.
It was sort of different, but similar to conversations we had before about how we define success, especially for women in this case. And in that original episode, we did talk about a lot of the things that women get docked for. And I think we are seeing a lot of interesting and needed conversations around that, why that needs to change. And some of them are a struggle. Some of them are a struggle still. Every day is not the same. So some days I feel like, okay, I'm doing better than other days. I think for me, pre-pandemic, a lot of the stuff I defined as success was around discipline, around my body. So like weight gain during the pandemic has been hard. And around work and, work during the pandemic has in some instances been hard. Don't get me wrong, we're very lucky we can do this from home. I am quite aware that this is a very nice setup to have. But I think everybody experienced that during the pandemic. Like some days it just was not there. And I feel like even in those conversations I have had more mindfulness around why I feel that way, why I think that way, why it's problematic, or how to try to reframe those conversations. So I think that's been good. That's something for me. I do certainly still feel like a failure in in a lot of things, but I'm more not forgiving necessarily, but I'm more like, well, how can we work on this? Let's recognize this. Why do you feel this way? What are other things you can do? And especially, yeah, in the world of feminism, you and I have discussed, like, we frequently feel like, well, we're not doing enough, or we're not, we need to do more. What if we're missing this? Or just feeling like we're not enough. And that's something that I still struggle with and grapple with. But with you, we've had these conversations, and I think sometimes you and I can help each other get through those sort of
Right.
darker moments.
I think so too. And I think we get a lot of great listeners. Our fam let us know what they're going through and how they feel similar to us, and or how to combat it, or how to like encourage it. So I think it's been wonderful to have that network that I've never had before. This is a beautiful turn of events for me to have that type of support network. I think you're completely correct, especially with feeling like all of the rights for women and those who have uteruses, and or any rights in general when it comes to civil rights as well as equality and equity has been slowly and is being slowly stripped away, it seems, as of late. And this impending need to do things, but confusion in what to do, who to trust, how loud to be it, who should be leading, who shouldn't be leading, who should be talking, who's not talking enough. All of these conversations come out, and it just kind of makes you feel stagnant because of fear. For me, that's exactly what happens. I kind of backed off of all social media, even though we're pretty supported as for our own social media stuff. And when it comes to conversation starters, people in our group, people in our listenership, they are amazing, and they have great conversations for the most part. Trolls typically don't come through on those types of avenues. Do we get trolls everywhere else? Absolutely. I have figured that out and try to ignore it. But like all of these things are big conversations that we need to have, because these are not just black and white issues as it should be, because it becomes a tear down within a group in trying to see behind the curtains and motives. And I feel like that's part of the big thing that's always been around. But now it feels like it's even sneakier with our talk conversations of misinformation and disinformation, and who is a good player and who's a bad player in this conversation as well. So there's so much to do. And as you and I have tried to research, and we try to be correct, we try to back it with research and evidence, making sure we're not misspeaking or speaking over others. There's a lot to be thought through in this day and age, and it should be. It should have come to this point. This whole like people talking about, it's too political, no one can say anything, no one can do these things. That y'all, we should have been talking about that. We should be considering this to begin with. And if it upsets you that you can't just speak as you spoke before, and you have to actually think about it, what? That should be the conversation you're having with yourself. That is an old adage, to think before you speak. And yet when we actually call people out on it, we're being told we're being too sensitive, or, all of these things. But with that responsibility, with that conversation, it's a lot. And I'm not saying that, again, I absolutely stick to that. We should be doing that. But it takes a lot of things, especially when you feel like every turn could be a mistake.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I have probably struggled the most with as of like our new failures, because I feel like the stereotypical things that we talked about at the beginning, that I talked about, that I'm coming upon 40 and I wasn't married and I didn't have a home and I didn't have children and all these normal things. And am I going to die alone? No one taking care of me, like my mother said.
Yeah.
But that's not important anymore, because what we come to is like, yeah, I've gotten some of those things. I've gotten into that place of like, I found, quote unquote, or I've settled into that, and I'm happy with that, content with that. But that's not the conversation anymore. And we've become, to the point, thank God, and I don't know if it's the Gen Zers who are like, yeah, come on, get over it, making us realize that these are not what define us anymore. Obviously, in this day and age, as we're fighting for human rights in general, these are the conversations that just like, okay, that was a tradition, but it doesn't make you, and it shouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Like, I've definitely felt for me, it could be a settling in of how I identify, and just, I really think that mindfulness of thinking about why you do things, but as you were talking about, like, even in these conversations we're having where people are having to, or should be putting more thought into them and always should have been, that's, some things just don't feel as important to me anymore, and other things feel way more important. And again, as I said, every day can change. Like, one day, maybe those will come back and haunt me. Like, oh, you're still single and you're renting an apartment, whatever it is. Uh, but those are becoming fewer and far between for me. Um, I also absolutely agree about I backed off of social media too. That's probably something I have struggled with the most, as well as being feminist enough, being supported, doing the right thing, doing the thing that's going to have the most impact. What does that look like? What are my skill sets? Because, and I know it's not, no one agrees on everything completely, but as in, what is the best way to support and help? So if I feel like I can't, I don't feel comfortable with the social media part, then I try to donate. Like, I try to find a thing. Like, if I care about this thing, what is the other thing I can do? And I am working on that, and I'm trying to get better about that. But that, being on this show and being a feminist show where we want to be intersectional feminists, and that's something that's our goal, that's our mission. It is something that we always are thinking about, and sometimes does feel overwhelming, and just, it can feel like you're a failure because it feels like you're not doing enough in this space. But at the same time, we've had a lot of conversations about burnout and about how activism can look different ways. And so I think those conversations are important and are ongoing. And again, not everyone agrees on what that looks like. But it's also interesting because I was thinking about this when you and I did that. It was the original Are We Failures? It was like our first time podcasting together, but it was like your first time. So it's been really fascinating for me to watch you grow and become more confident. And you have all these great ideas, and you always are just coming up with like new ways to make the show have more of our voice. And I struggled to come onto this show because of, like, I'm not going to be feminist enough. I'm not a good enough feminist. And I'm happy to see that I feel more confident in it. I think I could be wrong, but I feel like you feel more confident in it. I feel more confident in us together. And I feel like we've come up with like a lot of things that make this, because we've gone through several hosts on the show, that make it more of our voice.
Right. Yeah, definitely. From the first time to this time, I was in shell shock. Is that the word I would want? Especially for the first few months, if not for the year, trying to understand the impact of podcasting in general. Because I did not listen to podcasts, even though I had many of friends who were professional podcasters, trying to figure out what it was and what it is and how significant and important it can be. It's interesting, especially coming into this field, because yes, I was already in the social justice field. My specialty was with women and children, and coming into this is a whole different conversation when you talk about public forums and what this looks like coming out of the field into kind of more research. Research is not my stronghold, y'all. We know this. I don't know, y'all might not know this. Anney knows this. And it's been an interesting learning curve to do all of that conversation, making it about deeper, meaningful conversations on this research and what it means to have a platform in general. It's been interesting. And I feel like, yeah, we definitely have worked and molded this to our personality finally. For me, I think still part of this failure conversation is, what is my personality? Because part of my attachment issues is to melt and mold into the setting rather than being my own setting and being my own mold, because acclimation was number one for me. Fitting in, disappearing, becoming a part of the crowd is something that I learned to survive. And that's kind of still my mode. And it's really interesting to try to pull myself out of that, even though, characteristically, I'm loud, I make jokes, I am sarcastic, I am blunt, I am there. Like, my presence typically can be known if I wanted to be. Apparently, to some, I'm intimidating, which is hilarious to me. But all of that to say, still part of that conversation is also trying to fit in and molding in, especially when it comes to things that I feel like are out of my reach. I think you and I both talk about this a little bit when we're like, oh, this is not my field. This is not my personal take on things. So this is interesting. And dipping into that, but at the same time having that moment of realization that we who are fighting and learning new things in feminism and understanding intersectionality in itself is the journey that we should be showing, because we all should be doing this together. So I feel like we've really found that footing for ourselves because we are challenging each other, not just to mold it like for ourselves, but to love each other's loves, if that makes sense. And we are very different in our interests, and I love that. But I love that we understand under these what would be like just typical things, there's a bigger conversation of leaving marginalized people out. And that in itself should be talked about more and more. And I think we've done a pretty good job. I don't know. I put that as a question mark because I'm afraid to say it too loudly. But like when it comes to entertainment, when it comes to things that are typically held by men, which is the love of video games, the fandom of different genres, just understanding that and making it bigger. And we hate that we have to have that conversation of like, yeah, it excludes these people, these groups of people, and it shouldn't. And we need to talk about that, whether it's on the entertainment level, political level, housing level, like food shortages, healthcare, like all of these things. We have to go to that deeper level, because if we don't, we just allow the status quo, which is cis hetero men taking over the narrative and saying they're the most important beings to this conversation, and it shouldn't be, and why we have to like really rearrange who is being highlighted.
Yes. And that was one of when we had to write, like, what is this show about for work? That was one of the things we said was like intersectional feminism is everywhere. Like you can't remove any topic from it. Right. So no shortage of topics for us to talk about. And in the interest of transparency, listeners, some days, I bet if we did this episode on a bad day, we would have different thoughts. But today, as we're having this conversation, and for the past, because I've been thinking about it, and I just feel more settled, I think, in myself and in the show. So today, I feel there's certainly more work to be done. There always is. But compared to that first episode, I feel better.
Right. I think we've grown into understanding, once again, going past the narrative of the norm to today, and still always knowing that failing happens and it'll always happen. And that's a good thing, because when we fail, we learn, we grow. And that should be a constant.
Yeah. Failure is a constant. Wise words, Samantha. Wise words. Well, I'm very honored to be on this journey with you, Samantha. The very first episode. It's been a delight to work with you and see you grow.
I love that I can worm my way into this position with you, who is an amazing leader and a teacher in this. It's been phenomenal, and I do feel like I'm learning from the best.
Well, thank you. And thanks to you, listeners, because seriously, You mean so much. Hearing from you means so much. And you do. This growth we're talking about, a lot of it is thanks to you, because you will let us know what we should be talking about. Have you heard about this? You'll tell us, like, you missed this part of the conversation. It's honestly so rewarding, and thank you. And speaking of, if you would like to contact us, you can. Our email is stephanie@momstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter @momstuffpodcast or on Instagram @stuffmomnevertoldyu. Thanks, as always, to our super producer, Christina.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.